सी चढ़ गई ओए कुड़ी नशे सी चढ़ गई, पतंग सी लड़ गई ओए कुड़ी पतंग सी लड़ गई, नशे सी चढ़ गई ओए कुड़ी नशे सी चढ़ गई, पतंग सी लड़ गई ओए कुड़ी पतंग सी लड़ गई। उड़ती पतंग जैसे मस्त मलंग जैसे मस्त सी चढ़ गई, हमको तुरंत ऐसे लगती करंट जैसे निकला वारंट जैसे अभी अभी उतरा होने से टोरेंट जैसे नशे सी चढ़ गई ओए कुड़ी नशे सी चढ़ गई, पतंग सी लड़ गई ओए कुड़ी पतंग सी लड़ गई, नशे सी चढ़ गई ओए कुड़ी नशे सी चढ़ गई, नशे सी चढ़ गई। खिलती बसंत जैसे घुलता कलक जैसे दिल की दरार में वो प्यार का सीमेंट जैसे अखियों ही अखियों में जंग की फरंट जैसे मिल जाए सदियों से अटका रे मंड जैसे जुबां पे चढ़ गई ओए कुड़ी जुबां पे चढ़ गई, लहू में बढ़ गई ओए कुड़ी लहू में बढ़ गई, ऐसे खींचे दिल के पेचे गले ही पड़ गई ओए नशे सी चढ़ गई ओए कुड़ी नशे सी चढ़ गई, पतंग सी लड़ गई ओए कुड़ी पतंग सी लड़ गई। कन्नियाओ कट्टे कदी बन्नियाओ टप्पे कदी दिल दे चौराहे लंघदी है, हंसी कदी ठट्ठे कदी गलियां नप्पे कदी हंस के कलेजा मांगदी है। नशे सी चढ़ गई ओए कुड़ी नशे सी चढ़ गई।
Tặng gối massage đa năng Kimobalon Ensogon 850g. Tặng 3 chai Ensovimo Kimo 2 lon.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite all of you come near to the front seats, please. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite all of you to come near the front seats. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are still have many available seats in the front seats, so please could you move to the front seats? And for our conference will start in 5 minutes. Thank you.
participation. To our eminent guests and speakers and delegates, to have traveled long distances, I bid you a very warm welcome to Vietnam. We are indeed honored to have you here today. We have about 200 participants gathered here with us today, making our conference truly an international one.
And the youth conference will play an important role in gathering young people, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, not only from the Asia Pacific, but also across the world, who are working and interested in the field of reproductive and sexual health and rights to strengthen their voices, exchange knowledge, and take action promoting sexual and reproductive health, justice, and rights.
Furthermore, the Youth Conference presents an opportunity to promote meaningful participation in addressing reproductive sexual health and rights challenges and inequity among young people by cross-learning best practices and possible practical actions from their peers that can be used both in the conference and in their countries upon their return.
It is our great honor to introduce the following guests who are with us here today. Please welcome Mr. Vũ Đăng Minh, Director of Department of Youth Affairs, Ministry of Home Affairs, Socialist Republic of Vietnam.
Mr. Bjorn Anderson, Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific of the United Nations Population Fund.
Mrs. Sivanathi Thananchiran, Executive Director, Asia Pacific Resource and Research Centers for Women. Mrs. Aichis Ban, Country Representative of United Nations Population Fund in Vietnam.
And the utmost importance of our conference today, please join us in welcoming 200 youth delegates with the warmest round of applause.
And without further ado, we would like to invite Dr. Lê Vũ Anh, Director of Vietnam Public Health Association, representing the conveners, to make a welcome speech.
Good morning, colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, allow me to welcome all to our beautiful Ha Long city. It's my honor to inform you that our presenting in a natural resource of the world. This place has been selected as the home of our regional conference by most of our ISC members. ISC stands for International Steering Committee. We wish to introduce you an excellent conference for both programs and natural gifts of all given to all of us. At the convention of this conference, the first day should be saved for the youth. I'm sure that everyone would agree that youth must always be the most important elements for this conference, that the voice of the youth must be respected and be important message for the conference. This simply is that the young people can provide solutions to issues not only affect them, but also entire populations. However, a very thorny question arises that how to make the young people when understanding in detail problems related to sexual reproductive health and rights. Then how to make them nicely behave and practice these in their whole life. This is not at all simple. Although effort from the responsible government based on the fact that the problem related to sexual and reproductive health and rights have been identified as the biggest burdens of not only faced by youth, but starting from youth, and follow them for their whole life. So it's across all age. Such a chronic and long-term remaining problem, if happened in a larger scale, would cause a huge impact on the socio-economic system. That's why many governments have signed in and committed themselves to SDG with hope that the problem of APCRSHR be putting in right place of their political and economic map. However, it's totally not enough to sign up as SDG. Action must take place if they are to be achieved. A good policy can only be well implemented when it be conducted by a well-known, knowledge, committed, and experienced teams, which is well and appropriately supported both the organization and finance, and those, unfortunately, are weak points of developing countries. This conference is organized every 2 years, is actually a complementary on this floor. You are here today reflecting the importance of youth and their voices in this conference. You are here today share what you have seen and witnessed in implementing of SDG related to HAHR in your country. What have been and not been done and why. You are here for absorbing the experiences, lessons in other countries which might complementary to what you see back home, and you can bring back home those, try those if it works. That, I think, would be our expectation from this conference. This start is very, very big. Only one party would never be enough, even if that party is government. That is why the multi-sectorial, intersectorial approaches are important in which youth play a broad role as implementer and leaders. I'm sure that we would like to see the new process of working together be started right after this conference under different format. In other words, back and forth email exchange or teleconference will be setting up within the small groups of you. Those will gradually be growing in both scope and scale. Those would lead to some transnational and regional research and experience share, and some new public health model might review from that process. Youth volunteer group would be formulated based on their interest of solving health problems related to SRHR with some support of scientists. They might use their strong advantage in networking, IT application and use, and participating in some long-term interventions. Those are much more challenging issues related to SRHR, and that put them in the position of solving the ultimate goal of development. I'm always believe in development in whatever scale, even that's a family, a community, or country. Always we will start with youth. With all that thought, I'm wishing this conference, youth conference, some initiative toward networking, research, or new practical approach, and experience and efficient solution to setting up some public health model, as mentioned above, be a reality. I'm told that this initiative will be supported, since as a WHO report, only 5% of research done on SRHR compared to 30% of research done in infectious diseases. This is not a balance. I'm sure that VPHA, our Vietnam Public Health Association, will be more than happy to coordinate such activity, which can be shared proudly in upcoming conferences. Once again, allow me to welcome you and wish you a fruitful conference, and don't forget to enjoy the World Natural Heritage Site. Thank you so much.
Department of Youth Affairs, Ministry of Home Affairs, on stage to make the opening speech.
Kính thưa ngài Bjorn Anderson, giám đốc khu vực châu Á Thái Bình Dương của Quỹ Dân số Liên Hợp Quốc.
Mr. Bjorn Anderson, Director of Regional of Asia Pacific of the United Nations Population Fund.
Kính thưa bà Simavanthi Theman, giám đốc điều hành của ERO.
Mrs. Sivanati Tarantinan, Executive Director, Asia Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women.
Kính thưa bà Achit Ben, trưởng đại diện của Quỹ Dân số Liên Hợp Quốc tại Việt Nam.
Mrs. Astrid Span, Country Representative of United Nations Population Fund in Vietnam.
Kính thưa các quý vị đại biểu, khách quý và toàn thể các bạn thanh niên thân mến.
My dear colleagues, experts, friends, ladies and gentlemen.
Trước hết, thay mặt lãnh đạo Bộ Nội vụ, tôi xin gửi lời chào mừng nồng nhiệt nhất đến tất cả các quý vị đại biểu, đặc biệt là hơn 200 thanh niên đến từ các quốc gia khu vực châu Á Thái Bình Dương đã về tham dự hội nghị lần thứ 9 về sức khỏe, quyền sinh sản và tình dục do UNFPA tổ chức tại Việt Nam.
On behalf of Ministry of Home Affairs, I would like to send my warmest welcome to all the delegates, especially more than 200 youth delegates from the Asia Pacific to have gathered here in the 9th Asia Pacific Conference on Reproductive and Sexual Health and Rights hosted by Vietnam Public Health Association.
Xin kính chúc các quý vị đại biểu sức khỏe, chúc hội nghị chúng ta thành công tốt đẹp.
I wish you great success and health.
Kính thưa các quý vị đại biểu, trong tháng 10 năm 2017, Chính phủ Việt Nam đã cử phái đoàn tham dự hội nghị Bộ trưởng về thanh niên tại Moscow, Liên bang Nga.
Ladies and gentlemen, in October 2017, the Socialist Republic of Vietnam partook in the conference of Ministerial Conference in Moscow, Russia.
Tại hội nghị này, có 70 tham luận về chính sách thanh niên được Bộ trưởng các nước thay mặt chính phủ trình bày tại hội nghị. Và tất cả các quốc gia đều khẳng định rằng thanh niên là nguồn tài nguyên vô giá của quốc gia và luôn dành sự quan tâm, đầu tư cho thanh niên.
There were more than 196 countries partook in this event, and all of them put strong emphasis on the fact that youths play an indispensable role and received constant concerns and investment.
Việt Nam đã đạt được nhiều mục tiêu về chăm sóc sức khỏe sinh sản, sức khỏe tình dục và bà mẹ trẻ em của mục tiêu phát triển thiên niên kỷ. Việc cung cấp dịch vụ và thông tin về sức khỏe sinh sản, sức khỏe tình dục bao gồm các kế hoạch hóa gia đình đã được mở rộng về chất lượng dịch vụ và đã được cải thiện ở trong cả nước.
Vietnam was very successful in meeting most of the Millennium Development Goals ahead of the 2015 deadline. The provision of sexual and reproductive service and information, including family planning, was expanded and improved in the country.
Tuy nhiên vẫn còn nhiều thách thức trong việc chăm sóc sức khỏe sinh sản, sức khỏe tình dục và thực hiện quyền cho thanh niên và vị thành niên.
Yes, challenges still remain, especially related to sexual reproductive health and rights for adolescents and young people.
Các bằng chứng cho thấy hầu hết thanh niên ở Việt Nam còn thiếu kiến thức, kỹ năng thương thuyết và ra quyết định để có quan hệ tình dục an toàn và đồng thuận.
Evidence has shown that Vietnamese young people are still lacking knowledge and life skill to practice and negotiate safe sex with consent.
Chương trình giáo dục sức khỏe toàn diện tại các trường đại học vẫn còn hạn chế và bất cập cả về nội dung, phương pháp và cách thức truyền thụ.
Comprehensive sexuality in school is still limited in terms of content and methods of teaching.
Số liệu thống kê chưa đầy đủ cho thấy vẫn còn 1/3 thanh niên Việt Nam gặp khó khăn trong việc tiếp cận với các thông tin về dịch vụ chăm sóc sức khỏe sinh sản, sức khỏe tình dục và các kỹ năng bảo vệ, phòng tránh các nguy cơ đến sức khỏe sinh sản, đặc biệt là đối với thanh niên di cư, thanh niên nông thôn, thanh niên người dân tộc thiểu số.
The data has shown that 1/3 of Vietnamese young people continue to face barriers when accessing reproductive health information and service, survival skills to protect themselves from sexual and reproductive health risk. The situation seems more severe to vulnerable youth groups, including young migrant and young ethnic minority.
Trong đó, nhu cầu về phương tiện tránh thai của thanh niên chưa có gia đình chưa được đáp ứng, trong khi các chương trình về chăm sóc sức khỏe sinh sản, sức khỏe tình dục và kế hoạch hóa gia đình vẫn ưu tiên cho các cặp vợ chồng. Có thể nói chung là đây là cái nhận thức không chỉ là của giới vẻ thanh niên đâu, mà cái là nhận thức chung của vấn đề Việt Nam chúng ta là vẫn coi là cái vấn đề này chỉ dành cho những cặp đôi đã có gia đình. Thế còn các bạn thanh niên mà chưa có gia đình thì chưa nên nhắc cái việc này. Và ai nhắc đến vấn đề này thì coi là cái người đó là có những cái tư tưởng là không lành mạnh.
Especially when the needs of contraceptives is unmet due to the priorities for the married couple is the current sexual and reproductive health and programs in Vietnam.
Việt Nam đang trải qua cái thời kỳ cơ cấu dân số vàng với cái lực lượng lao động là trẻ chiếm cái tỷ lệ cao trong lịch sử. Theo cái số liệu điều tra về biến động dân số và kế hoạch hóa gia đình năm 2015 thì thanh niên và vị thành niên trong cái độ tuổi từ 10 đến 29 tại Việt Nam chiếm khoảng gần 30% dân số.
Vietnam experiences a period of demographic dividend regarding the highest proportion of young people in the country history. According to the Vietnam Population Change and Family Planning Survey in 2015, the adolescents and youth aged from 10 to 29 account for about 30% of total population.
Cơ cấu dân số vàng đã mang đến cho Việt Nam cơ hội lớn và duy nhất để xây dựng và phát triển nguồn nhân lực trẻ có chất lượng cao, đáp ứng yêu cầu của thời kỳ đẩy mạnh công nghiệp hóa và hội nhập quốc tế, là nhân tố quan trọng để quyết định sự hoàn thành cái mục tiêu phát triển thiên niên kỷ SDG.
This demographic window of opportunity presents Vietnam with a timely and unique opportunity to plan for this population transformation and make it new generation of youth, young people as a driver of social and economic progress, especially to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030.
Chính phủ Việt Nam cam kết cao trong việc tạo môi trường chính sách cho thanh niên phát triển, bao gồm cả tăng cường về thông tin về dịch vụ có chất lượng cho thanh niên và vị thành niên. Cụ thể là Việt Nam đã thông qua luật thanh niên năm 2005 và đang có kế hoạch thông qua cái luật thanh niên sửa đổi vào năm 2019. Ban hành chiến lược phát triển thanh niên Việt Nam giai đoạn 2011-2020 và đang tích cực triển khai thực hiện cái chiến lược giai đoạn 2 2016-2020.
The government of Vietnam highly committed to create enabling policy environment for youth development, including promoting quality information and service for adolescents and youth. For instance, Vietnam passed the youth law in 2005 and is planning to amend the law in 2019. We also have the Vietnam Youth Development Strategy 2011-2020 with the implementation plan phase 2 from 2016 and 2020 is being currently employed.
Kế hoạch phát triển thanh niên của Việt Nam tập trung vào các thách thức như là cải thiện sự tiếp cận và sử dụng các dịch vụ và thông tin về chăm sóc sức khỏe, sinh sản, sức khỏe tình dục thân thiện đối với thanh niên, nâng cao cái hiệu quả của chương trình giáo dục sức khỏe toàn diện phù hợp với lứa tuổi và văn hóa, giáo dục kỹ năng sống, kiến thức về bình đẳng giới, phòng chống bạo lực học đường, bạo lực gia đình cho thanh niên ở trong và ngoài trường học.
The plan of youth development focuses on addressing the different challenges such as improvement of accessibility to youth-friendly sexual and reproductive health information and service, strengthening the effectiveness of age and cultural appropriate comprehensive sexuality education, covering life skills, school violence, domestic violence for young people both in and out of school.
Đào tạo nguồn nhân lực có trình độ chuyên môn và kỹ thuật nghề nghiệp cho thanh niên tại các cái vùng có điều kiện kinh tế xã hội đặc biệt khó khăn, vùng dân tộc, vùng miền núi, biên giới, hải đảo, hỗ trợ và tạo điều kiện để các tổ chức cộng đồng tổ chức các diễn đàn đối thoại với thanh niên để làm sao lắng nghe được những ý kiến của các bạn thanh niên ở nhóm dễ bị tổn thương trong xã hội nhằm huy động được sự tham gia của thanh niên trong quá trình huy động xây dựng và thực hiện chính sách liên quan đến thanh niên.
Our plans also focus on training skilled human resource for poor, ethnic minority, and difficult to reach areas, with supporting the establishment and expansion of network and social organizations and forums of vulnerable and marginalized youth.
Kính thưa các quý vị đại biểu, mục tiêu của Hội nghị Thanh niên lần này là nâng cao tiếng nói của thanh niên và vị thế của thanh niên trong khu vực châu Á-Thái Bình Dương, trao đổi kiến thức, kinh nghiệm và kế hoạch hành động hướng tới thúc đẩy công bằng và quyền tiếp cận dịch vụ chăm sóc sức khỏe sinh sản, sức khỏe tình dục chất lượng cho các đối tượng trong xã hội, đặc biệt là vị thành niên và thanh niên.
Ladies and gentlemen, the goal of the conference is to raise the voices and the roles of the youth in the Asia Pacific, exchanging knowledge, experiences, and action plans with the aim of promoting equity and rights to approach healthcare services related to sexual and reproductive health and rights of high quality for people with different classes, especially teenagers, vulnerable, and marginalized groups.
Đặc biệt là các cái nhóm thanh niên yếu thế và thanh niên là người dân tộc thiểu số. Điều đó càng có ý nghĩa hơn nếu thanh niên được trao quyền và được sự tham gia một cách chủ động, tích cực để giải quyết các thách thức đó.
It would be more meaningful if the youths are given rights and honor to actively participate and tackle these issues.
Chúng tôi nhận thức rằng đây là cơ hội quý báu để được trực tiếp trao đổi, tiếp xúc và chia sẻ những kiến thức, kinh nghiệm từ các bạn trẻ ở các quốc gia khu vực châu Á Thái Bình Dương, từ đó rút ra cái bài học phục vụ cho công tác xây dựng và thực thi chính sách của Việt Nam trong thời gian tới.
We are aware that this is a great opportunity for us to exchange knowledge and experiences from the youth delegates, and this is the time for us to draw lessons planned for the upcoming events.
Kính thưa các quý vị đại biểu, Chính phủ Việt Nam đã phân công Bộ Nội vụ là cơ quan đầu mối giúp Chính phủ thống nhất quản lý nhà nước về thanh niên nhằm bảo đảm các vấn đề về phát triển thanh niên được lồng ghép và thực hiện trong các chương trình, kế hoạch phát triển kinh tế xã hội của các bộ ngành và địa phương.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Ministry of Home Affairs has been assigned to promote youth development to ensure that issues related to youth will be integrated and implemented within schedules of ministries and authorities.
Với cái vị trí chức năng của cơ quan quản lý nhà nước về thanh niên, trong thời gian qua, Bộ Nội vụ đã tích cực chủ động phối hợp với các bộ ngành liên quan tổ chức xây dựng và thực hiện các cái chính sách về phát triển thanh niên nhằm bảo đảm các vấn đề thanh niên được lồng ghép và thực hiện trong cái kế hoạch phát triển kinh tế xã hội của các bộ ngành và địa phương.
As the State Management and Development Agency, implementing policies on youth development to ensure that youth development issues are integrated and implemented in sectoral plans, contributing to National Socio-Economic Development Plan.
Và cũng trong diễn đàn này, chúng tôi rất là mong muốn nhận được những ý kiến đóng góp của các cái quý vị đại biểu đến từ các quốc gia trên thế giới trong cái lĩnh vực về chính sách với thanh niên để giúp chúng tôi làm thế là trong thời gian tới có thể xây dựng, thực thi chính sách trên cơ sở làm sao phát huy được cái sự tham gia tích cực của các bạn thanh niên. Chúng tôi ý thức rằng là cái chính sách phát triển thanh niên là phải được tất cả các bạn thanh niên được tham gia, không chỉ là với cái tư cách là người thụ hưởng, mà các bạn thanh niên phải là chủ động, là đối tác của chính phủ trong cái việc tham mưu rồi đề xuất các cái chính sách liên quan đến thanh niên.
We consider this a valuable opportunity to directly exchange knowledge and experiences from young people from Asia Pacific countries, from which to draw lessons for the development of appropriate policies for young people in Vietnam.
And we believe that young people should be participate and included as a partner, not just beneficiary of the national and government project and plans.
Cuối cùng, tôi xin trân trọng cảm ơn Ban Chủ tịch Hội Nghị Thanh niên Quốc tế, những người trẻ vô cùng quan tâm và tâm huyết đã nhiệt tình đã tổ chức cái hội nghị này. Cảm ơn cơ quan ban tổ chức, cảm ơn Hội Y tế Công cộng Việt Nam, các cơ quan đối tác của trong và ngoài nước. Xin cảm ơn Quỹ Dân số Liên Hợp Quốc tại Việt Nam, Quỹ Forbes và các cái nhà tài trợ đã hỗ trợ tài chính và kỹ thuật để tổ chức thành công hội nghị này.
Lastly, I'd like to send my sincerest thanks to the management board of the Youth Conference, the youngsters who are extremely dedicated and enthusiastic to make this event possible. Thank you other organizations, Vietnam Public Health Association, domestic and foreign partners. Thank you United Nations of Population Fund and Ford Foundation for your technical and financial support.
Kính chúc tất cả các quý vị đại biểu, đặc biệt là các bạn thanh niên ở các nước trong khu vực châu Á Thái Bình Dương có một khoảng thời gian tuyệt vời tại Vịnh Hạ Long, một trong 7 kỳ quan thiên nhiên của thế giới. Xin kính chúc quý vị sức khỏe, hạnh phúc và thành công. Xin trân trọng cảm ơn.
I wish you have a great time, especially 200 youth delegates, to have a wonderful time here in Ha Long Bay, one of the 7 wonders of the world. And last but not least, I'd like to wish you great success, happiness, and health. Thank you very much for your attention.
Of Department of Youth Affairs at Ministry of Home Affairs for a very wonderful speech. And next, please welcome on stage Mr. Lê Hoàng Minh Sơn, our first keynote speaker of today.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear my own young friends. It's my honor to welcome you today in Ha Long, Vietnam to participate in the Cultural Conference on Sexuality and Reproductive Health Rights. This event today that we, the young people, are leading is about our conversation, our issues, our rights, and our solutions. In this special movement, I have to admit that I actually have a little bit nervous to be the ones who is delivering the inspirational speech to all of you, my young friends. Because I had to be honest to myself, my inspiration is actually not self-produced from myself, but from one word. Actually, you are my inspirations. Dear my friends, it's more exactly about us all together. And yes, it's not about one shining star speaking for all of us. No, this is not what I'm looking for. We are all the tiny star, shine together, try to make something different, and it does. When all we are shine together, our brightness will make a tremendous difference. I'm sharing this because I strongly believe that being a chairperson of this conference does not make me different from you here and people out there. We are all young people, regardless of background, nationality, ethnicity, minorities, language, and locality, ability or living with disability, sexual orientations or gender identities and expression, or even have or have not HIV. We share the same issues everywhere across the world, across the regions, with lack of information and even education about sexuality and reproductive health. We face stigma and discriminations. We be stereotyped by our gender, our soji, physical ability. We had unmet need of family planning or modern contraceptions, which lead to unwanted pregnancy, unsafe abortion, and many more issues. Not only we do face a lot of issues, but we also blame for them because people, the community out there who don't understand us, think that we are the part of the problem rather than the part of the solutions. These attitudes that young people are disruptive and we are a bad influence of society is deeply rooted, not confined to our regions. Let's look back to 400 before Christ and see what Socrates had to say about young people. Our youth now love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for our authority. They show disrespect for their elders and love chatter in the place of exercise. They no longer rise when elders enter the rooms. They contradict their parents, chatter before company, gobble up the food and tyrannize their teachers. Socrates feared for the futures, and he did not trust in youth to play their roles in building a society for everyone. But nowadays, such attitude can be prevailed. But the point is, we need to admit that every person who are youth at some point, and no one can escape of that. So why we are easy to blame for problem? Why do older people forget, especially in Asia Pacific region, that young people can contribute and are contributing to our society, our economy meaningfully as an active citizens? Many of you here, I believe that you surely do something for your communities. This is before we are always a part of solutions. Young people are solutions. And people should remember this. The thing is, and think of youth in a positive way, like a J.K. Rowling has said, age is foolish and forgetful when it underestimates youth. My college and friends, my lives were changing at the moment I realized a condom can save life. After a long time, feeling shameful when people tell me that public health is it's just about distributing condom pills, going around and talking with household about counseling, family planning, talking with women, and try to eliminating the dengue fever. It were a silly choice, isn't it? Whereas public health is a good career choice? I questioned myself. I soon found out it was through the support and the inspiration from others, from my friends. My beloved friends, who I consider as my sister or truly leaders, had inspired me to start talking about sex and contraception confidently and openly to my peers, my friends, and even my parents. Not a stranger today, but she is the conference coordinator, Ms. Ding Phương Nga. Thank you. You are my first and true inspirations. Step by step, I have built up myself, become a sexual and reproductive health and rights activist. But it was not make me as myself today if I did not take small steps and take risks to talk about the controversial sexual and reproductive health and rights matters, such as abortion. Until now, I identify me as a pro-choice activist. Even my country's abortion is legal and safe upon women's request, but I deeply understand why my friends, my peers, and other people are still stigmatizing abortion. There are many reasons in these communities, such as the myth surrounding abortions, and even young people, when we were a child, we have been taught that abortion is bad, and motherhood is something very wonderful responsibility of woman's life. Whereas this vision is not applicable for everyone for many different reasons. So being a part of the youth champions in the network from Asian Safe Abortion Partnerships, and I met those leaders who advocate for the safe and legal abortion in their homeland. The regions gave me a lot of opportunities to hear more stories from women suffering from stigma, suffering from unsafe abortions. It seems often not so related if you, a man. After all, a man will not have to make a decisions about unwanted pregnancies. Well, let me say the fight for ensuring the rights to safe and legal abortions really does matter to me. It happened one day when a fake news about abortion was shared among Vietnamese young people. It was disgusting. It told a story about the young girl who repeatedly practiced self-abortion with some funny captions about how she feels great, very great about it, and it's never true. And I decided to speak up against those judgments and myths. Suddenly people called me a murderer. And it was the first time I cried because I understand that's not me. I am not a murderer. I feel lonely in this fight, so I questioned myself at that time. My roommate helped me. They also spoke up, but it seemed like having no help at that time to ease my guilt, my regret about speaking about abortion on the Facebook. Then I saw my second inspiration. My mother comment and message. She filed for me and told me what I did is never wrong. She believed that what I did was not only have to correct the information, but also defend for her and even my younger sister fundamental reproductive rights and even for women around the world. That inspiration from my mother is unforgettable and so powerful to me, and it makes me today. Now I see myself, and it's my privilege as a young man to have this opportunity to work with many, many amazing and wonderful women as activists, researchers, and inspired by them. Last year, in the World Contraception Day Ambassadors Project, I decided to change my strategy to achieve my goal. After hearing two stories from two different young ethnic minority girls in northern Vietnam, one is at my age, and one is younger than me. Same ethnicity, same situations, but different outcome. But they all gave me the inspirations. The ones who would give up her education at the age of 18 to make sure her sister and her brother have a chance to go to school. She loved going to school, but she sacrificed her opportunity. Now she got married and had 3 children. Her family is poor, but luckily, yes, it's luckily because her husband is nice and responsible man. She told me how excited she was when we talked about education and going out of this place with high mountain and no road to travel. Her story made me believe in the rise to education, the goal 4 in the Sustainable Development Goal, to ensure the quality of education for everyone. So I can imagine how she would become if she got her opportunity to fulfill her need of education. In contrast, the second story about a girl who very strong, and whatever situation was, when a woman's aware of her rights, she will deliver a power of change. So this is her story. When I was 16 years old, in the grade 10, my parents forced me to get married with my cousin, who is one of my aunt's son. I did not think properly at that time, so I agreed with my parents' wish. After a traditional engagement, I stayed at my houses and continued schooling. But after the grade 12, I found out there's a consequence of incest and to the future generation. So I wanted to cancel my wedding, but my parents refused it. Failing to convince my parents, I tried to quarrel with my cousin, attempting to make him hate me. Finally, he decided not to continue this marriage anymore. Now, I am in college, and I know for sure in the future, I will marry someone I love, who loves me as well, and he will be chosen by me, not by anyone else. This is a wonderful story that I heard from her. Finally, seeing everybody today, I can see how meaningful participation is. It demonstrates your commitment and willingness to strengthen our voice, the young voice, to exchange our knowledge and take actions in promoting sexual and reproductive health and rights. Trust it. By gathering together today, we, young people, are empowered and proactive. We are here not only learn and share our experience, but also speak up and take action for our sexual health and rights. This happens not just now, not just here, but also in the future when we return to our home country. We need to move forward together to prove that young generations are the vital voice in contributing to a better future for everyone. So, last but not least, I want to demonstrate a performance. I want everyone to stand up. Thank you. I want hand over your head. And clap your head after I count 3, 2, 1, okay? Are you ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, you might ask the questions like, why did we do it? It's somehow meaningless, it's somehow meaningful because you can move, you can bring the joys. But now we've moved to the final things. Together with me, we say, my body, my rights, okay? 3, 2, 1, my body, my rights. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. I wish everyone will fulfill your time in this conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your heartfelt speech. To continue, it is our great pleasure to invite Mr. Bjorn Anderson, Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific of the United Nations Population Fund.
Good morning, colleagues and friends, Tsing Tao, and it's really a pleasure for me to be here today to attend this conference hosted by the government of Vietnam. Thank you. And on behalf of UNFPA, the United Nations Population Fund, I also would like to bring greetings from our newly appointed Executive Director, Dr. Natalia Kanem, who will be joining us later in the week. It is such a pleasure to see all of you here gathered today to discuss your issues and how you can participate and provide solutions, and what matters to young people, and in particular sexual and reproductive health and rights. So let us thank the Youth Conference organizer, the Vietnam Public Health Association, for ensuring that young people are contributing to this important conference. We need more and more youth voices to strengthen advocacy in the region and young people to take action, both as partners, but more importantly, as leaders. The theme of this conference is very strong and very bold. Leave no one behind. Justice in sexual and reproductive health. It links very closely to the commitments and vision of the Program of Action that emerged from the 1994 International Conference on Population and Development, which again guides the work of UNFPA, as well as the vision of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda and its Sustainable Development Goals, whose ultimate pledge is to leave no one behind. Justice in this overarching context is ensuring that those who have been left behind in the past are now truly reached first, going forward into the future. There are so many opportunities in the 21st century. We have the largest population of young people ever in history, and so many countries have the potential to reap what Mr. Din said, the demographic dividend. In this interconnected age, young people are linked up with each other as never before. This has opened new possibilities and new horizons for young people, but for all societies. For countries to achieve the demographic dividend and for young people to realize the tantalizing possibilities, we must act swiftly, fast, to invest in young people strategically and compassionately, and reach those furthest behind. This means investing wisely from the beginning of life in the basic pillars of well-being and prosperity, health and education, linked, of course, to opportunities for gainful, decent employment. However, too often, investments in health and education begin to dwindle when childhood gives way to adolescence, and dwindle even further when adolescence transitions into adulthood. This lack of investment and these critical points of life, including investments in sexual and reproductive health and rights, results in harmful outcomes in terms of health and education, in terms of employment opportunities and prospects for people, and overall in terms of a country's socioeconomic future. Evidence across this region, Asia-Pacific, clearly shows that young people are being left behind, particularly in relation to their sexual and reproductive health, often due to restrictive laws or policies that limit access to information and essential life-saving services. Restrictive laws or policies that often stem from social cultural norms and practices that truly need to be re-examined and indeed overhauled to ensure the physical and psychosocial health and well-being of each and every one of us. I'll expand on these matters shortly, but first let me consider some sobering statistics from the Asia-Pacific region. We know that today approximately 10,000 adolescent girls die every year from complications of pregnancy in this region. 5.2 million adolescent pregnancies occur every year, and in several countries, adolescent pregnancies are actually increasing, despite the global trend of decreasing adolescent pregnancy. And why should this be? And we need really to ask ourselves honestly, tough questions in order to move forward. And for example, our current policies and programs directed at the sexual and reproductive health and rights of young people across the spectrum and truly beneficial and detrimental? Are we approaching the issues that impact and affect young persons through the lens of a genuine gender equality and empowerment, and through a young person's lens, more importantly? Or are we allowing age-old patriarchy and other harmful norms construct to impede progress and advancement? And all of these important and complex questions, we need to provide direct and honest answers, and we need to do it together, especially with young people. It's a fact that each and every one of the 1.2 billion adolescents around the world today will go through puberty. Some will be well prepared, continuing their education, acquiring the information and skills they need to negotiate safe and pleasurable sexual life and relationships, choose their own partners, decide if and when to start a family, have options for decent employment, and play important roles in the community. But too many adolescents, and particularly girls, are woefully unprepared for this new and challenging phase in their lives. They leave school early, receive no sexuality education, enter marriages when they are still children, and have children when they are still themselves children. Sociocultural factors, together with long-embedded stigma and discrimination, mean that we are not reaching or investing in marginalized young people and adolescents. Those in remote rural areas or communities, urban slums, adolescents with disabilities, young migrants and ethnic minorities, and young people from key populations. We are not committed enough and not investing enough to ensure that all adolescents, both girls and boys, but especially girls, can reach their full potential. It's not that we don't know what we should be done. We have the solutions, and this has clearly been illustrated by the Lancet Commission on Adolescent Health and Well-being. We know that keeping girls in school reduces adolescents' pregnancy by over 9 births per 1,000 for every additional year of school. We know that child marriage has been reduced globally through a range of multi-sectoral approaches. We know we now need to reach the poorest and rural communities to end child marriage. We also know that thanks to a wealth of clear evidence that implementing comprehensive sexuality education, or CSE, enables boys and girls to have the communication skills and respect they need for each other, and along with self-respect and respect for diversity. CSE imparts critical information and builds and strengthens decision-making skills so that adolescents make choices that are safe and consensual. But can we honestly say that sexuality education is being taught well in all schools in any country? Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's be clear. We will not progress in reducing gender inequality, including the crisis of gender-based violence, which is occurring in different contexts. Nor will we progress in reducing adolescents' pregnancy or HIV transmission if we do not fully commit to scaling up quality sexuality education. We need to provide every adolescent with education and SRH services as a right, and see this as a right to sexual and reproductive health, as it is ultimately fair and just to ensure each adolescent can achieve the full potential, setting a foundation for life and for their families. And there is also strong, in addition to all of this, economic arguments for moving forward in this way. And investing in the sexual and reproductive health of adolescents can result in cost benefits from 6 to 12 times the initial investments, 6 to 12 times, or even more, as a matter of fact. As an example, HPV vaccination alone has benefit cost ratio of up to 22. So why is not every country in this region providing a nationwide program for HPV vaccine, given the data and the evidence we have in front of us? And moreover, an investment of just $5 per capita each year to improve the health of adolescents will save an estimated 12 million lives, prevent more than 30 million unwanted pregnancies, and avert widespread disability, and result in economic and social benefits that are 10 times the cost. A truly significant return of investment. Last but not least, we need to recognize our joint leadership and engaged adolescents and young people as genuinely important allies in the design and the implementation of programs, policy development, and decisions in societies. And let us do away with tokenism, talking down to young people, paying their participation lip service, and let's truly work together as equals every step of the way. And this is especially important in the area of sexual and reproductive health and rights, when you as a young person develop your sexuality and look at reproductive health moving forward. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, partnering with and investing in the largest generation of adolescents and youth in history of the world is the most effective way to support developing countries faced with emerging challenges. And I also want to underline that the Agenda of 2030 is also universal, which includes all countries around the globe. And it has not only committed to leaving no one behind. The Agenda of 2030 has also challenged all of us to strive to reach the furthest behind first. We know who these are, and especially among young people, but we're far from achieving this. Let us find ways to come together on all of these matters and finally do them real justice and the justice they deserve, if we are really to ensure that no one is left behind. In this, UNFPA has been and will continue to be your foremost supporter and partner. And once again, I would like to extend my gratitude to the government of Vietnam for hosting this conference and for all organizers. I'm looking forward to have a very interesting week ahead of me. Thank you very much.
For your speech. And now please put our hands together to welcome Mrs. Sivanati Tanentiran, Executive Director, Asia Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here today, and I just wanted to extend my thanks to Mr. Vu Dang Min, Director of Youth from the Ministry of Home Affairs, the Government of Vietnam, Mr. Bjorn Anderson, Regional Director of UNFPA Asia Pacific, Ms. Astrid Band, UNFPA Vietnam Resident Representative, Professor Lê Vu An from the Vietnam Public Health Association, distinguished members of the International and National Steering Committee of the 9th APCRSHR, thank you for bringing us to this very beautiful Ha Long Bay with its stunning and awesome views. I also wanted to thank Ms. Nga, who has held this conference together, and that itself is a testimony to youth participation and youth leadership. And of course, Mr. Son for that amazing speech and for leading the Youth Steering Committee in preparation for the youth conference. So, yeah. So, since I was given this task of making a speech, and I thought, you know, how can a middle-aged person, because I am a middle-aged person, although I was young before, make an inspirational speech to young people who are just so trendy and so out there and incredible in every way, who are actually prodding me to think better about the agenda as compared to me giving you those thoughts, right? So I thought that I wanted to theme it quite provocatively, and I wanted to call it Sexuality and the SDGs, right? And perhaps as a background, you know, the UN system just began implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, and you know, they have been launched with great fanfare. In comparison to the MDGs, the SRHR movement has actually garnered two very important goals which are pertinent to our work, which is Goal 3, ensure access to sexual and reproductive health care services, including access to contraception and to reduce maternal mortality, right? And Goal 5, which is to achieve gender equality and empower all women, and it includes to end all forms of discrimination and violence and harmful practices like child, early and forced marriage and FGM, and ensure universal access to SRH and reproductive rights as agreed in accordance to the International Conference on Population and Development, ICPD. This was a result of, the next slide please, yeah. This has been a result of a long negotiated process by the intergovernmental system. There was a high-level panel of eminent persons, the open working group discussions, and 2015, post-2015 intergovernmental negotiations, right? In comparison to the MDGs, there is broad ownership of the SDGs, and all governments committed to this in the UN Summit on Sustainable Development. There's also been great media coverage at national governments to sensitize citizens and stakeholders, and there's been a great deal of interest from many sectors on the SDGs. Next slide. Okay. So at the heart of the SDGs is the issue of inequalities, which are evident to every citizen on the planet, and as such has resonated with the public in a way that has not been seen. But will eliminating inequalities necessarily make us all equal is a question I would like to pose. Because, as Son pointed out, there are so many different intersecting identities that we have, which may not enable us to become that equal citizens in this world that we imagine, right? So, sexuality. This presentation is provocatively themed, as you can see, to show how the human element can be largely missing from large development agendas. This is also to ask the questions, what have we learned from the last 2 decades of SRHR programming and policy making? And despite recognition in 1994 in both Cairo and Beijing of human sexuality, that this sexuality element is missing in 2015 from the SDGs. So what is sexuality? How is sexuality connected to the Sustainable Development Goals? Why would we connect it anyway? And why is sexuality important? So there are different aspects of sexuality. Most people, especially when they enter into intergovernmental negotiations, would like to think sexuality equals people having sex. But as you know, some of these pictures shows us that it comprises all of human behavior and human life, you know. And it is, from these 20 years of SRHR program and policy making, what we have learned is in the next 15 years, it is critical for us to frame SRHR with an affirmative framework on sexuality. This broader framework would consider the non-biological or non-physical expressions and aspects of sexuality, such as desires and fantasies, as well as the gender power relations that governs gender and sexual expressions. This is not to suggest that the body is unimportant, but to point out that is more to sexuality than just sex and reproduction. This understanding of sexuality and sexual rights as distinct from reproductive rights also speaks to the recognition of young people's sexualities, and its diverse expressions underscores the need to approach sexuality positively as a part of life that has the potentials to offer excitement, pleasure, comfort, intimacy, and all the joys that sexuality can offer. Okay? And sexuality is contested. Okay, and we have experienced this, right? And controversial at the international level, perhaps more in the national level, but also at some country level and local policy making and programming, and in public discourses, as Son was saying, you know, his own experience of making a Facebook post about abortion, right? You can get attacked. Sexuality of young people in particular remains deeply contested. At this heart of these contestations is a push by some governments, schools, and religions to control sex, along with a perception that the only acceptable sex is heterosexual, married, and procreative. Right? So these are the things, the concepts that we need to interrogate. Yet, because we know that sexuality is a central aspect of being human throughout life, which encompasses sex, gender identity and roles, sexual orientation, eroticism, pleasure, intimacy, and also reproduction. Sexuality is experienced and expressed in thoughts, fantasies, desires, beliefs, attitudes, values, behavior, practices, roles, and relationships. While sexuality can include all of these dimensions, not all of them are always experienced and expressed by each of us, you know. And sexuality is influenced by the interaction of biological, psychological, social, economic, political, cultural, ethical, legal, historical, religious forces, right? And this is not me, this is the WHO in 2006 who said this in defining sexual health. So what are young people's realities in experiencing sexualities, right? So the realization of rights related to sexuality as well as reproduction makes a big difference to young people's health and well-being, social acceptance, and in some cases, even life and death. It bears significantly on how people, including young people, live and die, on their physical security, bodily integrity, health, education, mobility, social and economic status, and other factors that relate to poverty. Indeed, the consequences of contestations and incursions on sexuality are often borne hardest by young people because of the age-power difference, right? Factors such as gender, poverty, marital status, educational status, gender expression and identity, sexual orientation, religion, amongst others, would cause even greater challenges. Hence, sexual rights is a critical right that needs to be recognized, respected, and fulfilled. It is, after all, as Justin Trudeau will tell you, 2017, right? So, and part of that 20 years of policy making and program implementation of SRHR has seen that we have utilized different frameworks and approaches. One has been that protections and violations or violence prevention approach, which focus on eliminating and fighting sexual violence and addressing violations. Then we have the discrimination and violence on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, which have been recognized by the Human Rights Council and the UN Secretary General, the previous UN Secretary General. The public health perspective, which is emphasis on sexually transmitted infections and reproductive ill health, including unwanted pregnancy, unsafe abortion, and maternal mortality and morbidity. Now, these approaches are important entry points and address very real recurring problems of battering, abuse, sexual harassment, rape, gender discrimination, and discriminatory and harmful traditional practices, unwanted pregnancies, unsafe abortions, and HIV STIs, right, amongst the myriad SRH issues that we have. But an approach that affirms sexuality as being integral and of value to people's lives also makes demands for human rights. Just as women's rights and reproductive rights are human rights, so must sexual rights be claimed as human rights. This is reflected in the evolving articulation of sexual rights that includes rights to be free from discrimination, coercion, and violence. The rights based on positive ethical principles such as those of bodily integrity, my body is mine, personhood, the right to make one's own choices, equality between and amongst men, women, and of transgender people, and respect for diversity in the context of culture, provided that the first three principles, you know, the violations, violence, are not violated. So a need to broaden acceptance of sexual rights and its key components such as respect for bodily integrity, choice of partner, consensual sexual relations, consensual marriage, access to comprehensive sexuality education. These are not something abstract, but they're actually very translatable into key actions on sexual rights. So understanding gender in a broader sense, and this is a picture of the gender-bred person, which most of you would have seen, right? And the next step is, of course, you know, redefining marriage beyond a heteronormative framework and recognizing different unions to have the same legal and social validity beyond social, cultural, and religious norms. Reducing the burden of gender roles and encouraging equal partnerships within unions. reducing and ending sexual and gender-based violence by questioning traditionally held notions of manliness and machismo, and building alternative visions which allow for the rejection of existing gender norms that are linked to cycles of power and violence. Reducing and ending sexual violence, including marital rape and sexual harassment, and putting an emphasis on autonomy. Autonomy, both reproductive autonomy and sexual autonomy, bodily integrity and pleasure as outcomes rather than health and disease management as outcomes. The end of discrimination against those of diverse sexual orientation and gender identity. And because this conference is taking place in the Asia-Pacific region, we know very well that LGBTI young people continue to be marginalized and discriminated against in so many different forms, some very much harshly so in the countries in our region. So an inclusive approach that LGBTIQ youth are largely overlooked during the design and implementation of programs and activities, with few initiatives that support their sexual and reproductive health and rights. Given the significant stigma, myths, discrimination that LGBTI youth experience, which limit access to their rights and health care. In addition, their lives are often difficult, with their communities, their families, and friends often rejecting them. In some cases, they are forced to conform to a gender binary, or are raped, or are forcibly married in order to correct their behavior. So to ignore the immediate need to ensure that there are safe spaces for young LGBTIQ people is to overlook a crucial dimension of sexual and reproductive health and rights. Interventions that affirm the sexualities, gender identities, and expression, the rights and integrities of young LGBTIQ persons are critical in our region. So the next step is perhaps, we will recognize all sorts of relationships and all sorts of, and without discrimination, right? So human sexuality is part and parcel of the social life of humans, and as such has been infused with all of the values, judgments, and perspectives arising from the other organizing factors of society, right? So it's gender, culture, religion, economics even, race, and hence our calls for social justice must recognize, respect, and fulfill young people's autonomy, agency, and bodily integrity if we are to create a more equal world for all of us. So with that, I just say, keep calm and be proud of who you are. You're already amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Srimanati Thanentiran, Executive Director of the Asia Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women.
We will now have a 10-minute break. Please join us in our group photo session on the stage, and then the tea break is ready outside on the hall. The conference shall proceed in after 10 minutes. Thank you.
So we're going to have a group photo together. Thank you.
Xin nhờ các bạn tình nguyện viên lên sân khấu giúp kê ghế ạ, để chuẩn bị cho buổi session tiếp theo. Xin nhắc lại, xin mời các bạn tình nguyện viên lên sân khấu ạ. Xin mời các bạn tình nguyện viên lên sân khấu giúp kê ghế ạ. Xin cảm ơn.
Alo. Alo. Đưa luôn một cái nữa đấy. Cái để một cái bên dưới để chạy.
Ladies and gentlemen, Please take out your seats so that we can begin.
Will be the moderator of this session.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and welcome back to the plenary sessions and the panel discussions. So to achieve our goal to engaging youth in advocacy and intervention related to HRHR at the regional and national levels, and also provide advanced knowledge and information on reproductive and sexual health and rights for young people. This plenary session and panel discussions about sexual and reproductive health and rights in the SDGs and youth inclusions hope to provide everyone an overview and educate information about HRHR, how it's integrated in the SDGs, and how young people across the regions and the globe can work and understand about their roles, about how they can advocate and participate in the agenda. So in these sessions, I want to welcome the three speakers, my friends. So I want to welcome Mrs. Divya, is a program officer at AERO. She's holds a bachelor degree in science of Monash University and the majors of pharmacology and psychology. She's excited about integrating her studies knowledge in reproductive health and her passion for women's rights. Divya is also the International Steering Committee for the Youth Conference. Welcome, Divya. I also would like to invite Mr. Gon, is the regional coordinator from Youth Lead. Gon is currently the regional coordinator of Youth Lead, overseeing the regional programs and leading the regional policy work. His areas of expertise include grant management, program development, and research and M&E. Welcome, Mr. Gon. And one of my other friends, Manasa, Miss Manasa. Manasa is a feminist activist who's passionate about the theories and the process of social justice, especially in the context of urbanization and datafications. Manasa graduated as a Master of Science in Gender, Media and Control in London School of Economic and Political Science. Manasa is now working for the Youth Parliamentary Foundations. Thank you. Welcome our speaker. Thank you. So now, I would like to invite Divya to give her presentation. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Divya Kanagasingam, and as Son just mentioned, I am from the Asia Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women. Today I will be talking about young people's SRHR in the SDGs, and in the interest of time, I'll jump right in with some context setting. So a whopping 60% of the world's 1.8 billion young people aged 10 to 24 live in the Asia Pacific region. We know that SRHR creates conditions that allow young people to live a quality life through better health outcomes and better opportunities. And yet young people's SRHR are curbed due to social norms, taboos, religious and cultural restrictions, and we know that violations against young people and girls' SRHR exacerbate women's and girls' vulnerability towards poverty, and that poor reproductive health outcomes such as early pregnancies, unintended pregnancies, excess fertility, and poorly managed obstetric complications and maternal deaths can be reduced if there was access to SRHR. We are in an extremely precarious point in time for the SRHR agenda in the region, and this is due to significant macro-level challenges. Firstly, governments seem to be deferring to national sovereignty as a way of maneuvering out of international commitments and human rights conventions. It is interesting that many governments in our region are willing to sell national sovereignty in trade agreements, but use it as an excuse to not ratify human rights agreements. Secondly, there is a growing right-wing conservatism and ethno-religious groups trying to dismantle secular and legal frameworks and water down constitutional guarantees. Thirdly, there is a donor deprioritization in the region as fertility levels come down and as more countries become middle income. However, despite these countries being richer, inequality has risen within them. The effects of the global gag rule will also permeate in the region and stop much-needed resources towards SRHR programs. And fourthly, pressing issues such as conflict, refugee crisis, climate change-related and natural disasters are causing diffusion of resources, preventing long-term investment in SRHR. In this environment, it is critical that we monitor closely the progress towards young people's SRHR, and today I'll be focusing on how we can do this through the SDGs. The SDGs provides us a rather progressive set of indicators that illustrate big developmental issues we face today. However, it is not able to give us a holistic picture of issues faced by certain groups of people, and this is particularly true of young people. In order to provide an accurate picture of issues faced by young people, we must therefore supplement the SDGs with youth-centric indicators. I'll be focusing on 3 goals today, Goal 1, Goal 3, and Goal 5. So to start off with Goal 1, many young people lack choices and opportunities related to employment, health, education, and which increases their vulnerability towards poverty. We know that violations against young people's SRHR, especially for young women and girls, which still persist in the region, exacerbate their vulnerability towards poverty. While there has been much research demonstrating the effect of poverty on reproductive health, few have focused on the reverse relationship. Poor reproductive health outcomes such as early and unintended pregnancy, excess fertility, and poorly managed obstetric complications could increase the chances of being poor. However, we need more data to support this. Life course events, including transitions into adulthood, marriage, and childbirth, often play a significant part in altering a young person's vulnerability towards poverty. However, these are not always well considered in traditional poverty measurement. We must therefore ensure that there is adequate and disaggregated data available that illustrate the causal factors that exacerbate poverty in young people, including how they uniquely experience it. Moving on to Goal 3, good health and well-being. The risk of maternal mortality is highest for girls under 15. However, cross-country comparable data is only available for the 15 to 19 age group, rendering invisible those most vulnerable girls under 15. Efforts to prevent early and unintended pregnancy rely on accurate information about adolescent knowledge, behaviors, and access to services. And although we have indicators in the DHS for the 15 to 19 age group for age-specific fertility rate and contraceptive prevalence rate, not all countries in the region report against them. And there is nearly no data collected for unmarried young women and girls, because, you know, if you're not married, then you shouldn't be having children. That's what it. Anyway, young people and adolescents are vulnerable to violence because of age, and and that they live within hierarchies and structures in which essentially they are dependent on others. Families, schools, and communities are not the safe spaces they should be. We therefore must address the multiple gaps in relation to disaggregated data when ascertaining the health and well-being of young people, especially young women and girls. Lastly, Goal 5, gender equality. FGM-related data is severely limited in the Asia region. The practice is hidden and affects girls in selected communities, which adds to the challenges in compiling data. Child marriage, we know people who are in child marriage have experienced increased risk of domestic violence, including intimate partner violence, physical violence, and sexual violence, who marry before the age of 15, and have been firmly established, and yet there's a dearth of evidence on child marriage beyond the number of girls affected, and even this is limited. There is a severe limitation with regards to evidence related to violence. Much of this is based on reported incidences, which is affected by young women's and girls' ability and willingness to report and share experiences. Adolescent and young people may often not know that what they are being subjected to is tantamount to violence, and this is especially true of sexual violence. Speaking up is often dismissed as children making up stories for which they are scolded or further punished for. Moreover, young people very often risk losing everything, especially since they are dependent on those structures of family, community, and school that are not often safe spaces that they should be. I'd like to end my presentation on this sexual autonomy indicator. And I know it's a study on contraception, but I think it shows how sexual autonomy may be a better indicator for empowerment than traditional autonomy measurements. What this study did was take particular questions from the DHS and use it to create a sexual autonomy index. We need to be looking for and creating exciting and innovative indicators like this to capture the realities of young people's SRHR. Thank you.
Sexual and reproductive health and rights in the SDGs agenda. Now we move to the second speakers. I would like to invite Ms. Manasha Priya. She will give us a presentation on meaningful youth participation and inclusion. Thank you.
Hello. I am Manasa Priya Vasudevan from the YP Foundation, India, and I do not have a presentation with me, so you are just going to have to look at me and patiently hear what I have to say. I am definitely not going to talk about why it is important to involve youth in meaningful ways in global agenda setting with the lot of you, because then I would be preaching to the choir. The choir in this room, which constitutes mostly of youth members and, well, non-youth members who I shall politically correctly refer to as allies, right? Okay, so what I will talk about, though, is strategies on what we can say to people outside of this room for the next 3 days on why it is important to involve youth meaningfully in global agenda setting, to deconstruct the catchphrase that has become youth meaningful participation, and also to become the political subject that is youth, and to enact this subject actively in all policy spaces that we occupy. Let's begin with recalling the youth journey to meaningful participation so far. We've come a long, long way from when youth was seen but not heard, when youth was sprinkled across existing agenda like garnish, when youth were layered onto existing agenda to fulfill gaps in the last mile outreach, such as flash mobs, door-to-door dialogue, online campaigning. Oh wait, some of this still happens, right? Some of these models are too familiar because some of these models still exist. It is not that these models of youth engagement are well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with them per se, except that they do not really allow for youth to meaningfully engage with or substantively engage with the designs or the foundations of this policy-making processes. So going forward, I'm going to constantly kind of use this refrain: the politics is in the design. And that is why it is most important to involve youth right from the planning and the design phases of policy making, right? Let's examine the most commonly stated reasons for why youth should be engaged meaningfully in policy spaces and global agenda setting. The first most commonly stated reason is that youth are the future. Youth are in fact the ones that are going to inherit this world, right? And I'm sure many of you have heard these phrases. They're used still today. And my response to that would be, where is youth today? Does youth live on a different planet till we inherit this very planet that we live in at the very moment? We are part of the problem today. Youth are some of the most vulnerable victims right now. We are more than tomorrow's beneficiaries. We are today's citizens. We're today's right holders. We are today's subjects. The second most commonly stated reason as to why it is important to involve youth in global agenda making processes and agenda setting processes is the youth bulge. Around 2008 and 2010, when we grew in numbers in most developing countries, when nations lost count of how many youth were in their countries, youth suddenly began to count. Our stakes in this planet literally rose. Well, this is just not a strong enough case for why our participation in the 2030 agenda is suddenly really important. Because this means that if tomorrow or by 2030 there is a slight fluctuation in the youth bulge, does that mean that our entitlement to participate in these processes would subside? That opportunities for participation meaningfully in policy-making processes would suddenly decrease? The bulge may have granted youth the legitimacy, but our vulnerability to violence, to sexual abuse, to rape, to early and forced marriage, to HIV, to tuberculosis, to asthma, to drug addiction, to climate change, to underemployment predates the youth bulge. We matter not only because we are a significant demographic dividend, we matter because we are citizens of this world today. Fortunately, times are changing though. There is strong support from civil society organizations and INGOs to encourage our participation in global agenda setting. In some places, there is even strong political will to engage youth more meaningfully in policy-making processes. We are beginning to occupy, we are beginning to be seen, we are beginning to be heard, but our journey doesn't stop now. Our journey of claims making in these spaces doesn't stop now. Remember, the politics is in the design. Most of these spaces that we are invited to occupy presuppose a homogeneous youth identity based on the expertise of others and not on the lived experiences of youth themselves. The question then remains, are these spaces designed to optimally engage youth to their fullest potential? Because we are not here to fit comfortably into a mold that has already been typecast for us. We are here to explode that very mold because its one size does not fit each and every one of us youth delegates. I remember being at the high-level political forum last year, and after I was done speaking, I was advised in front of all to speak in a more youthful language, to speak in a manner that was more accurate in representing youth. Representing this youth constituency that I was standing in for. And I was fairly confused. Because as youth, we are young in age, that we are. We are a reservoir of energy, yes. We are technically savvy or advanced, yes. But we are also capable. We have agency. We think critically. We can lead. We are the evidence. We are poor, we are rich, we are colored, we are white, we are women, we are trans, we're lesbian, we're pansexual, we're queer, we're intersectional. We are intersectional, we're political, we have voices, we will talk, and we must speak, or we will be spoken of. Thank you.
Thank you for the fascinating presentation and speak. Thank you so much, Manasa. So now I would like to invite Mr. Gaul from Youth Lead to give the last presentations on the youth investment and resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Son. Good morning, everyone. And hopefully I could continue that strength, that passion which Mansa just left in this podium. So I think I have now some kind of responsibility to keep that sustained. But my topic is slightly, could be boring, because I'll be talking about resources. So before I start up, can I ask you like some questions? How many youth-led organizations in this room? Can I see hands? Youth-led organizations? Can I see hands? Hands up, please. Oops. Okay. How many of you need funding, youth-led organizations? All of you who raise hands? And one final question for you is, do you have core funding? No? Nobody raise hand? Nobody have core funding? Okay. That makes my life a little easier, so that I could speak something that we could make sense out of. So before I start, so let me introduce myself once again. My name is Gaj Gurung. I'm from Nepal, and I work with Youth Lead, the regional network of young key populations. And today, definitely within the 7 to 10 minutes, I won't be able to give you the silver bullets of the resource mobilizations, but I'll be able to give some context of what's happening or where we are going and what is the situation based on my own understanding and having working with the regional network for a couple of years. So lots of the things which I'll be going to share are based on my experiences. So before that, I think I'd also like to thank to our UNFPA regional coordinator, regional director, who made my life easier, because he has already spoken lots of things about the need for the investment. So I think I don't have to reiterate about the importance of the resource mobilizations or the importance of the investment. But then what's the reality? So the broadly to define, I guess, resources is cash and kind, right? It's either money or either people. So we have networks, we have connections, coordinations, so that's kind of cash. And the money is money, finance, budgets, all those things. So just recently I read this resource mobilization toolkit developed by Frida, and there was a very strong statement which is telling that resource is not a need, resource is our right, which we often, though whatever the reality is, but if we look resources through kind of a perspective of the right-based approach, then it's our right. We really need to demand. Okay, so that's the first key message. And it says, because resource in the form of the money is power. Money is power, as simple as that. So the aim of the resource mobilization often is also to shift the balance of power. It's not meant to say that you completely overturn the shift of balance, but what we are trying to say is we try to give the money to the one who doesn't hold the power, so that one can become powerful. But we're not trying to create any kinds of dictatorship over here with the money. But what I'm trying to say is resource mobilization is an act of activism. So it's an act of lobby. So it's not merely writing grants, writing proposal, but it's a huge lots of activism that we need. So this is my first key message. So in terms of the context, so what's happening and what is the funding landscape, as the regional youth organization, personally, I don't see a very good signs of resources, particularly on our issues related to health, sexual reproductive health and rights, and I particularly work in HIV, which is more daunting. And some of the key reasons why it's happening is there are shifting priorities now, and I guess I don't have to talk much about that. I think when we shifted from MDGs to SDGs, I think we saw that shifting priorities very tangibly, and it's actually affecting all of us tangibly. At least my organization is being affected very tangibly because of that. And the second thing is, I guess now we are seeing lots of regressive laws and policies, not just at the countries. We'll talk more about the regressive policies at the countries later on, but globally as well. And the famous one was gag. So I guess I don't have to talk more about that and how it has really, really affected directly to the issues of sexual reproductive health and rights. And sadly, I guess, I mean, like, it's not just for us, but we don't, particularly for the youth-led initiatives or, youth-related issues, we don't have a global fund. Meaning the concept of global fund here, I'm talking about the larger investment or the larger political leverage to have that kind of investment. We have global fund for children, we have global fund for women, though I don't claim it as very big. We have a huge global fund for AIDS, TB, and malaria. I feel like now it's time to envision some kind of global fund for young people. Why not, right? So, but we don't have that until now. And what we have is we have merely lots of very scattered short-term projects in the name of innovations, in the name of empowerment, which is not bad, which is really good. But the question is, to what extent that is sustainable? Because just now I asked the questions, do you have core funding? And none of us have core funding. And we cannot volunteer for the whole life long, right? We need money to sustain ourselves before we sustain our organizations, which is not there. Thirdly, it's not a very good way of put this thing, but we at this region, with this shrinking funding, we're also competing with other regions. And particularly on health, sexual reproductive rights, I think we are very much competing fiercely with Africa. As I said, we're not trying to, bring that demarcations, but the life of human beings, the human rights matter everywhere, right? But there has been a very tangible evidence where, with the shifting priorities and with this shrinking funding, we have been competing against other regions. And fourthly, once again, I'll just like to take the words from Mansa. She said about allies, about non-youth organizations. So in that point, I'd like to bring youth-serving and youth-led organizations, and I think both are equally important. But the problem is, as soon as the funding dries up, or as soon as something happens, then it's all the time youth-led organization who is highly affected. In spite of the fact that the youth-led organizations are the innovators, they are the one working on the front line, they are the one working on the ground, they are the challenge takers or risk takers, but as soon as something happens, as soon as there is, something happens with the funding, they are the one to dry up or die up. So these are some kind of, a key kind of a context which I see. And finally, it's core funding versus program funding. And I think this, when you raise your hand, I guess it's already been, very vivid, like, to what extent we have a core funding, or to what extent we have that, a backbone funding to sustain our organizations. And the simple answer is we don't have. And as the regional organization, I also don't see any now organization at my site who can be very flexible to provide you the salary, or to provide you your room rent, or to pay your electricity bills. It's not happening. So what's happening? We're trying to create lots of program activities, program funding, and try to extract your core funding from that program activities, and it's not going anywhere. Neither your program is efficient or effective because you're trying to do on a low budget. And the problem is we are ready to do something on the low budget because we don't have options now. And also the thing is, we are so much highly dependent on the external funding. So this is true for everyone, but now the problem is we are dealing with lots of very sensitive issues like abortion, sensitive issues like LGBTI, human rights, where the state will not fund. And now the donors are transiting from the countries, given that lots of countries have reached a level of income which is classified by the World Bank as the middle income countries, upper middle income countries. I don't know what that means. But on that particular indicators, the external donors are pulling up their fund, right? And they're asking for the domestic funding. Definitely domestic funding is increasing. If you see the funding landscape overall at the development sector, the domestic funding is definitely increasing. But the point is, does that domestic funding address what we are working for? Say in a country where that particular country criminalize or they don't see LGBT as the citizens, how that particular country will fund the human rights or the treatment issues of transgender or provide condoms to or the PrEP to the men having sex with men. That's not possible. So we see lots of gaps, not just in terms of the money, but I guess it's a whole kind of a void created for the human rights, human lives in itself, which is a which is an issue. I guess we don't have a solution for now, but at least there has been some kind of advocacy which have started, but seems like it's a long way to go. How many times do I have? 2, 3 minutes more? Because we do have our Q&A as well. So, but before that, I just wanted to give some context about now just going very much to the ground. What's happening with the youth? The resource mobilization initiative with the youth lead organizations like mine. So I see 2 things. There are weaknesses on our side. As a youth lead organizations, I think we have not been able to do what we have to do. And secondly, there's a huge structural barriers which we're not able to pass through, or which systematically deny us, or which systematically creates a barrier. And as Mansa rightly said, the politics is in the design. So let me try to translate how the politics is in design in terms of the resource mobilizations. And some of them are cliche, but I guess we have been telling this again and again without any solutions. Firstly, as we know, like lots of our youth lead organizations are grassroots level organizations. But whenever there is a call for proposals, they are way too technical. The requirements, sometimes the requirement is the organization has to spend or should have a track record of 100K euro, 500K euro. It's simply not easy to understand what really that means. Secondly, as I said, now we have only short-term funding without core funding, and that's also again pushing us again and again to the same circle where we're not able to do we're not able to equally benefit to our constituency nor to our organizations. We're just managing a projects on that circle, and we're not able to come out from that. And thirdly, and very importantly, the politics in a design is there is no explicit investment for young people. I think young people is the highlight of the conference. We always have pre-youth conference. Wherever we go, we have lots of commitments, but when we go back to the country, I don't see lots of that commitment being translated into the money, or that commitment being translated into some kind of a tangible support that would help the youth lead organizations to foster and to do their work effectively. I don't see that. And finally, we also talked about data. I think Dibya talked lots about data, and this data is very much directly related to our resource mobilization. There is no data. There is no data means there is no evidence. There is no strategic evidence. But when we have to write proposal, it requires whole tons of data. Where do we bring those data from? We don't have data, we don't have evidence, no money for you. As simple as that, I guess. And finally, I think now, as Mansa said, I think we are being in lots of decision-making structures now. But again, that engagement, again, is a design. And we are there. We could say something. But I'm not sure, like, whatever we say, where does it go? Because it's never translated into the allocations of the resources for the young people. It's never translated when the programs are designed or when policies are being made. Or sometimes we have something in the policies in the background, and it's not budgeted, right? So that doesn't make much sense, except it's just making some of the things fancy without any tangible outcomes. Now, what are our weaknesses? So I think some of our weakness, key weakness, is our own organization, I guess. So the literatures and some of my experience says we need 3 key areas for the resource mobilizations, or for someone to be convinced to give us some money. That is accountability, transparency, and legitimacy. So here, accountability, I'm referring to our own systems. Financial system, our program system, our management system. And I have to say, unfortunately, in lots of youth leader organizations, our systems are pretty weak. And part of responsibility comes to us, because we are so much focused on other aspects, so much focus sometimes, so much focus on programs or conferences or different other advocacy, we miss out our accountability towards our own organizations. So often what's happening is, this is not to blame this is not a blame, but that's what I have seen is the leaders of the organization is going up, your organization is going down. So we really need a balance of how the leadership and the organization would go hand by hand. And the legitimacy is in terms of the legal registration. It may not be a very big issue all the time, but it has really played a role when you want to mobilize resources. Now there has been some flexible organizations where they would provide money when you have a fiscal host. I mean, you're not legally registered in your countries, and you have a fiscal host to work for you in terms of the legal aspects. They're fine, but it's not fine for lots of organizations. And on our experiences, we have seen that legal registration, it brings empowerment to the particular organization, and it also, convinces lots of donors that you're serious enough, that you're trying to do something. And this very other common thing is a transition. So as a youth leader organization, this transition of leadership has been, kind of a very problematic, and it's not just, issue for the resource mobilization, it's the issue of this, whole lots of other things. But what we need to understand is the leadership transition itself is not a standalone problem. It's accumulated when you don't have proper accountability, when you don't have proper, systems within the organization. So I feel like, the leadership transition, it's a systematic problems within your organizations when the organization is not strong enough to reach your constituency, not able to manage your organizations. There could be chances when you're doing really well, but still you don't find, because it's a very volatile stage, youth as being a very volatile stage. But transition needs to be seen as your systematic problems within your organizations. And the final thing is, as I say, we really need to have a balanced mobilizations of both resources, cash and kind. And for the youth leader organizations, once again, I would reiterate that we have been more and more focusing on, I think, kind, I guess, because otherwise you would be raising your hands when I say, do you have core funding? I mean, but this is not to say that it's because of our weakness we don't have a core funding, because I also explained lots of our structural barriers. So here, by telling our weakness, by explaining our weakness, what I'm just trying to see is, let's try to have a balance between what we're not able to do, how the politics in the design has systematically marginalized us, and how we are. So with this, some of the notions, I will end up my remarks here and look forward for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your speech, and it's very interesting. It's not actually boring, but you talk about the very crucial and importance about financing or funding things. So all 3 our speakers actually gave their presentations, and we are now in the panel discussions. And before we start, I just want to say hi with everyone who's watching us on Facebook, because we are live streaming now. And thank you for the media teams a lot to make this sessions inclusive. And we also invite and welcome all the questions from people here and all the questions from the Facebook. If you want to have any opinions, your questions, please hashtag APCRSHR9 so we can read and we can send it here for our speakers. And even later, our volunteers will have the mic. And if anyone in this room have the questions, please raise your hand and volunteers can come and give you the mic, okay? Okay, thank you. So wonderful, really wonderful speech from Divya, Manasha, and Gaur. So Divya, you talk about the HRHR in the SDGs. And in your presentations, I saw the CSEs that you put in the golden trees. So I'm not sure if anyone have concerns the same like me. Like we also have the goal 4 about education. So anything you want to give the comment or like your opinion about that?
Oh yeah, I think in the SDGs it's captured under education, but in the interest in my presentation I wanted to put under health because I thought it was a really important aspect of health and well-being. So that's why I included it and yeah.
Yes. Oh, thank you. So, are there any like related goal that you can see that the sexual and reproductive health and rights can like integrate in?
There are a lot of intersectionalities that we need to take in consideration with SRHR, and that includes climate change, humanitarian crisis, especially means of implementation, goal 17. So those are really, really important goals, and I didn't really have time to go through it. But we really need to develop better youth-centric indicators for those so that we can present a better picture of youth issues. Yeah.
So I think very similar to what Divya said. I think what is important is to, again, deconstruct the catchphrase that is that the youth are in the heart of the SDGs. If we're really in the heart of the SDGs, we do need to look at intersectional identities that youth occupy, intersectional spaces that they occupy, and see how we can better kind of come up with a convergence model, right? So to not look at any of these things separately. Like Divya said, CSC would like immediately kind of fall under education and health at the same time. It is about, if you put it under the education goal, then you probably will be able to achieve outreach easier with regards to mainstreaming comprehensive sexuality education. But then CSC has to become an important aspect of health as well, because your medical service providers and information givers are traditionally come with a stigmatized lens that needs to be undone in order to be able to achieve a holistic kind of sexuality enabling environment for youth sexuality. So, I mean, I would always look at all of these as more of a convergence, moving towards more convergence.
So yes, we're still talking about the SDGs when we also about the inclusions. So actually that when the SDGs has been passed and a lot of the groups, including young people, they also see themselves there. But some marginalized group, they don't see themselves there, especially like LGBT people, like people who has different identities. Yeah, sexual identity, sexual orientation. So, do you have any comment for that? I would like to give that question or Manasha.
Yes, definitely. I mean, you have identified rightly, and this would not be just a youth problem, right? Across the board, the SDGs is fairly, with regards to the indicators, in terms of gender, they're fairly binary in their identification. And that might be too little too late, because we're talking about a 2030 agenda where most of the country is now waking up to LGBTQI politics, right? So this is a problem which is not just a youth problem, it is a population problem. As a demographic dividend, we are not giving enough kind of recognition to marginalized sexual identities or alternate sexual orientations, definitely. Yeah, that's a problem across the board.
Okay, thank you. And Gold, do you have any comment on that?
I'm not the expert in SDGs. Haven't worked much on SDGs, but definitely I would echo what Mansa said. I think in spite of all those consultations and the huge engagement of the young people globally, I guess still there are lots of gaps, and we really need to I guess some of the areas where we can work them now is at the country level, because that's where the actual the implementations of the SDG takes place, and that's where actual marginalization takes place, because lots of things when we deal at the regional and the global level, I guess it's slightly different. Definitely we need that advocacy to actually translate some of those commitments and actions at the country levels, but now at the time that we really hit the head of the catch the bull by the horn. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we talk more about the SDGs 3, the health, good health and well-being. So this question is for Divya. So some people see the SDGs 3 is about the health goal. What about the rise, like the perspective to see the SDG 3s in the sexual and reproductive rights?
So definitely universal access to sexual and reproductive health and rights is a human right, and access to good health and well-being is a human right. So we have to see access to affordable and accessible health as a human right, yeah, and especially for young people.
Thank you so much. And this session is about the youth participation, meaningful participation and inclusions, and overall our speakers. So I want to hear your opinion and maybe some definition in your mind, what exactly you think is youth meaningful participations or inclusions.
Yeah, so I definitely want to make a distinction between inclusion and meaningful youth participation, but I'm sure most of our audience who have been to similar spaces are fairly aware of the differentiation, but it's still important to consistently make that distinction. To include is to add, can sometimes be misconstrued, or is most often misconstrued as to add on. But when you are adding a new constituency to an existing policy-making space, the reconfiguration needs to take place, which means that the entire policy space needs to be reconfigured in order to be able to forge equal stakeholdership between each of the constituencies present in that space. For instance, even today, it is fairly disconcerting, whilst at the same time comforting, that this space is primarily 90% occupied by young people and youth. In that, when I was given the topic meaningful youth participation, I didn't think that it was necessary for me to spell out what meaningful participation looks like to a whole audience of youth members, because I feel like there is a certain kind of consensus amongst us all that meaningful youth participation needs to be more meaningful, to say the least, and definitely is important in today's kind of global agenda setting spaces. But I think we need to be having these conversations more with an intergenerational group or a multi-stakeholder group, so that we maybe get different perspectives on what meaningful youth participation could mean to other people as well, so that we can kind of get some kind of clarity on how to strengthen these processes and make sure that there is more dialogue and less ghettoization of discourse.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. Do you want to add something on that?
Yeah, I think she has already explained lots of things on the meaningful youth participation, and I guess we have been discussing on this meaningful youth participation again and again. So, I mean, for me, my simple understanding is, I think I have been trying to understand this meaningful youth participation through the approach of human rights, telling it's inseparable, it's indivisible, or it's generalizable. meaning that, what's happening is it has to come in a comprehensive package. So meaningful youth participation, in a way, we sit here, we give the kind of remarks that when we go back, hey, your job is done. I guess that's not, a very good, meaningful youth participation. I guess there are different stages where, in each stage of the decision making or in each stage of policy making, in each decisions of program implementation, I guess there are different areas where, we can contribute positively, where, whatever affects our life, that we can provide more inputs. And meaningful youth participation exactly says that, we have our stake in all those processes. But the problem here is, in between those processes, we have lots of cracks. And we keep falling out of that cracks while we talk about the meaningful youth participation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, I can see the hand from here. Can I ask the volunteers to pass the mic to him?
This is Umair Aslam from Pakistan. My question is about allocation and distribution of the resources. First, I would like to thank to you sir, such a comprehensive and to the point presentation. You talked about the weaknesses, and of course this is difficult to talk about our weaknesses first. Don't you think specifically in countries, developing countries, corruption is one of the big weaknesses which is we are ignoring at both sides, public and private sectors? And secondly, I would also like to know about the advocacy and behavior change approaches which we could adopt in future to enhance, to strengthen the public-private partnership, because that is actually the sustainability. As you talked about the project, the short-term project, innovation and best practices, that's again a short-term project. How we could strengthen, sustain and scalable projects in our community, specifically in SRHR. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will pass.
Yeah, should I have to come? Thank you. Thank you for your questions. I think for the first question, I guess, that's a very fact, I guess, a very bitter truth, which, I don't think I have to explain more on that. And definitely, I think corruption on different forms and different levels are on both sides. It's just a matter of, sometimes the intensity or sometimes the damage it has done, but the corruption is corruption. So I think I don't have to say anything on that. So regarding the advocacy around public-private partnership, I don't have lots of experience, in my career doing this, public-private partnership. But as I said, advocacy is is one of the key components of the resource mobilizations. Apart from we do grant making or the proposal writing. So here, let me give you, maybe I can give you my understanding first on the public one, and then see how we can relate that to the public, public-private partnership. So in lots of the, traditional fundraising kind of a thing, where there are donors, where there are state, and there are us, receiving the money. And most of the time, based on my experiences, it's our issues and it's our lobby and it's our advocacy that has really helped us to mobilize the resources. And here what we need to understand is we also need to be clear while we're advocating, are we advocating for our organizational fund, or are we advocating for the issue-wise fund? I mean, like sometimes both of the things could be same, because if your organization is big enough to represent the entire constituency of young people, or whatever constituency you represent, it could be the same thing. But sometimes if one organization is not doing that and the advocacy is around that particular organization, we might have some repercussion in terms of we might be missing the bigger boat, because sometimes the funding for the issues, that particular issues becomes much important, because that will have a national coverage or much bigger. It may not be direct benefiting to some of the youth leader organizations, but it will have larger impact in the long run. So I think on the same context, for the private sector, now I think we all know about this corporate social responsibility, but it's a little tricky. I guess it's not that as simple as you have CSR in some of the corporate sectors and you go and talk to them. I think here, since we're dealing with the corporates, I think along with advocacy, I think there has to be some kind of a smart move or some kind of a strategic lobby that we need in order to kind of initiate those discussions with the private sector. Because often what I've seen is, like for instance, if you even look at the call for proposals by some of the private foundations, they already have specific countries. I mean, like almost different other donors also have that, but particularly their interest of countries, their interest of agenda is very much sometimes related or directly or indirectly to their products, which we need to understand. And our advocacy has to be smart in terms of that. So my message is, I guess, for the private sector, sometimes often our general advocacy just for our issue may not work. So yeah, that's my understanding. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You still have okay, because the time is limited, so one last question.
Oh, okay. Hello. Hi, everyone. Hi. I'm Joe Barredo. I'm from ASEAN Youth Forum. I am a human rights activist. At the same time, I do advocacy on SRHR and on LGBT and SOGI. Before we had the MDGs, before we had ICPD and the SDGs, all our governments, all our states have assigned to the Universal Human Rights Declaration. And I see the importance of linking the SDGs with human rights. But the sad scenario now is there are shrinking spaces for human rights, specifically on SRHR. I think the word rights in SRHR is something that is being sidelined and that is being belittled by many of our governments. And with this intersectionality and the shrinking spaces, the first thing I want to ask is how can we link this up as young people? With mostly as young people, I am on my way out of being youth. And how can we do that? And how can we link human rights into our work? The the Universal Human Rights Declaration, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights stated that all people are equal and there should be no discrimination amongst all. So, and that's what we've been fighting for until now. And I think this also links to resources, because many of us are working with governments. How are we able to not compromise human rights and SRHR in order to work with governments? And how do we be able to mobilize resources in order to not compromise our human rights and our SRHR? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe.
It's a massive question, thank you. And I think I'll just start off and then we can all, just input. Yeah, so I think that's a significant problem within the SDGs is the lack of accountability and the lack of accountability mechanisms. Like even the review process, countries can choose to review, even if they are up for review, they can choose not to do it. And that's why we really have to look at, human rights conventions who do actually have better mechanisms for accountability and how we can sort of use one to make them account for the other. Do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, like Divya said, it's a really big question, and the rising right-wing governments, the kind of ideology that is becoming more prominent in the top order is becoming harder to kind of sustain dissent. It is becoming harder, especially for young people, to challenge. It is also becoming extremely hard because then you go back to the question of participation. And a lot of the time, this participation looks a lot more like co-optation, right? Because the governments, and this is something that Gaj pointed out as well. You look at the public-private partnerships, sometimes you're being co-opted into a national, and that's a national government priority, which may be even in conflict with your sustainable development goals and indicators. Or similarly, when you're looking at a private NGO partnership, you're falling into similar kind of leanings. What youth-led organizations and civil society organizations in general can do, though, is consistently strive to be informed by any kind of dissent that is taking place around us, despite the right-wing scenario, right? And there is a lot of dissent that is taking place across nations now. So whilst we're also undergoing transformations in governments, more authoritarian rulings and regimes, it is important to notice that side by side your civil society space and young people are getting a lot more political. Young people are getting a lot more critical in their thinking, they're challenging, they're dissenting, and not just in online spaces, in offline spaces as well. And I think it is important for youth-led organizations and civil society organizations to not lose touch with ground movements in all of our kind of bureaucratic NGOization that we sometimes get caught up in. And definitely kind of, and a good way to do that is really to strive to make intergenerational pipelines and stop looking at it so binarily as, youth and non-youth. It really kind of, it's a binary I kind of reinforced today, but it's only to sort of like satire, to make a kind of, to point out how that could be problematic in all of that kind of, you are youth, you are non-youth, who can speak, who cannot speak. We sometimes forget to dialogue, right? Because we're so busy competing with each other as to who is a better representative. We sometimes forget that it is really kind of like a pipeline. We each transition out of youth, we become, whatever is next. I'm not sure we have a term for that yet, but maybe the next 20 years we will. But, it's important to kind of not lose sight of that and constantly keep ourselves informed that in this depressing state of right-wing ideology, we also have a lot of dissent that can be seen, that should be amplified in policy spaces, that we should strive to make that global to local or local connect more strong with every step of the way.
If I have to say around like human rights in terms of the resource mobilization, I'm not sure if I have lots of things to say, because it's not been a very good situation in the country when you really want to mobilize the resources in the name of the human rights. Then there has been lots of backlashes. So on our experiences, because we also work on human rights on different issues. So it may not be a very good way of saying it, but in some of the countries where it's very extreme human rights conditions, but you really need to work there, then we're just tweaking around some words. So we're just trying to integrate the core human rights into the areas of let's say access, treatment, because I work in health, so I'm just trying to relate some of the human rights issues into the health. So those are some of the kind of things that we're trying to do and try to integrate the human rights component into some of the work we do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And it's 12:15 now, and I'm so sorry for late your lunch. And the last thing I just want to say, like, thank you very much, Divya, Manasa, and Gard, to be here today. The conference, lucky to have you. And we are, all of them are still here for the last 3 days. So if anyone have a questions, just come and ask and network and share the information, share the questions and opinions. And thank you so much to attend the panel discussion, the plenary sessions. Thank you.